Speaking of critics and opposition, Justin Trudeau is facing both right now. The Prime Minister of Canada is under tremendous pressure from both truckers and opposition lawmakers to put an end to pandemic restrictions. But Trudeau remains unrelenting. This is despite the fact that the protests have entered the 12th day. They're hurting Canada's economy. Goods worth billions of dollars are stuck at the US-Canada border. The auto industry is bracing itself for disruption and delays, but Justin Trudeau says he's not going to budge. His refusal to talk to the protesters is not only infuriating them further, it's also spurring similar protests in France, Australia and New Zealand. Here's a report.
This is Ottawa, the capital of Canada, and currently a city under siege. For 12 days now, Ottawa streets have been clogged with trucks, rigs and SUVs, all in a bid to get pandemic measures axed. The protesters have pledged to keep going for as long as it takes. They begin protesting in the morning and continue all the way till midnight. So far, 20 arrests have been made, 1,300 tickets have been issued, and 79 criminal probes have been launched. But the movement refuses to die down. The blockade has not only disrupted daily life, but is also proving fatal for Canada's economy. Here's how. Thousands of miles away from Ottawa, the protesters have blocked several key highways which connect Canada with the United States. This includes the Blue Water Bridge in Point Edward and the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor. More than 8,000 trucks, over 40,000 commuters, goods worth $300 million, including $100 million worth of auto parts alone, cross these two bridges every day. Their movement has now come to a halt, disrupting supply chains on both sides. For Canada, this poses a big challenge, as it sends 75% of its goods exports to the United States. Washington too is equally concerned. The White House says the auto industry should brace itself for delays.
We are watching this very closely, because, as you kind of touched on here, the Ambassador Bridge is Canada's busiest link to the United States and accounts for about 25% of trade between the two countries. And so the blockade poses a risk to supply chains for the auto industry because the bridge is a key conduit for motor vehicles, components and parts, and delays risk disrupting auto production.
Back in Ottawa, the Canadian Prime Minister is in a fix. He's under pressure not just from the truckers, but also from opposition parties in Parliament. On Wednesday, he faced a flurry of questions from lawmakers who pressed him to lift vaccine mandates.
You need to end it with public health measures. You need to end
The shouting grew so loud that Justin Trudeau had to sit down, forcing the House Speaker to come to his rescue.
Mr. Speaker, there are people across this country asking this Prime Minister for clarity, leadership, and hope. People are so frustrated with this Prime Minister that there's protests nationwide.
The kind of support Canadian truckers are receiving has led to similar demonstrations all over the world. In France, a Freedom Convoy has kicked off with the same demands. Lift pandemic restrictions, remove vaccine mandates. Last we checked, the convoy was en route Paris to build pressure on the Macron government.
I am here to carry the voice of freedom, to try and make it heard that we have had enough. We want to go back to our old lives.
In New Zealand too, a similar movement inspired from the Freedom Convoy has emerged. Protesters have been camping outside the country's parliament for 3 days. The Wellington police is struggling to break them off. New Zealand's Prime Minister says the protests are not a reflection of what the majority feels.
But I'm still reminded that relative to the people that are at Parliament now, On the very day that they're there, tens of thousands of people went out and got vaccinated. It is not reflective of where the rest of New Zealand is at right now. All of us want to actually move on. We're working very hard to put ourselves in the best possible position to do that.
It started from a small town in Canada's British Columbia. It's now slowly becoming a global movement. Does it make it acceptable? For these protesters, it does.
De retrouver notre liberté. Freedom, freedom, freedom.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.